The African Export-Import Bank and Thelo DB Proprietary Limited, which is South African-based, have signed an MoU to develop, finance and operate railway projects in Africa. The MoU is meant to support the modernization of the continent's railway as a catalyst to promoting trade, investment and economic skills development. We're joined in studio now by Ronald Ntuli, who is the chairman of the board of Thelo DB. Ronald, thank you for joining us on Newswell. Firstly, congratulations on this momentous moment for your consortium as well. I mean, I think this is a massive opportunity. And, you know, one of the problems with infrastructure, particularly on the continent, is that construction companies don't have enough work. There's not enough projects underway because of financing. And this seems like it's paved the way for some amazing opportunities. And we know on the continent particularly that we have many missed opportunities when it comes to trading with each other.
Correct.
Because we're landlocked.
That's correct.
And, you know, there's lots of pressure on the roads. Let's look at the state of infrastructure, particularly transport infrastructure on the continent right now.
Correct, correct. So thank you very much, Vic, and thank you for having us. So first point is Thelo DB is not a consortium.
Okay.
For me, consortium assumes it's different parties coming together for a specific purpose.
Yes.
So Thelo DB is an incorporated partnership. So it's a partnership between Thelo, which is a South African company, 51% black South African company, and DB, which is Deutsche Bahn, the German railway company, one of the biggest mobility companies globally.
Who will obviously be assisting you on this ambitious project.
Yeah, so as again, we are partners. We bring our capacity, funding capacity, and understanding of the continent of Africa. They bring global railway expertise, railway and mobility expertise for both freight and passenger. The intention behind the partnership, incorporated, as I've said, is that we work to resolve the mobility and transportation challenges that the continent faces, and excitingly so in the context of the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement, which is imminent.
Yes. Okay, let's look at, we know that transport is an integral part on the continent, you know. It is, but it also has to be regulated. There needs to be policy around this.
Correct.
How does, I mean, I know you can't tell us too much about, we'll talk about it later, but let's talk about policy. Who regulates this? How is this going to be managed?
Yeah. So because of the capacity that we bring to the African market, in our vehicle, we inherit 108 years of railway experience globally through our partnership with DB. So, and what they have done in many parts of the world is support governments in setting up the regulatory environment for railways. You will know as well as I do that over many decades, the railway industry, specifically on the continent of Africa, has kind of not been as maintained as should be, both the hard infrastructure and the regulatory environment. So part of what we bring to the continent is the ability to work with governments on the continent, whether it's to set up safety regulators, track access protocols, any aspect of rail from a regulatory point of view, from an infrastructure development point of view, from an operations point of view, and now from a financing point of view, we bring to the market. And the advantage clearly is that now we can bring to the markets, to governments on the continent, including South Africa, we can now bring funded solutions to deliver sustainability in the railway operating environment.
All right. I mean, with this railway project...
And sorry, the really important thing that for me excites me, again, because the railway sector on the continent has been ignored for so long in many jurisdictions, is that the skills are really short. So what DB has globally training academies, a big part of the intention, we've agreed in the partnership that we're not going to parachute a whole load of expatriates. We're going to train and develop skills on the continent so African expertise in the railway sector.
I'm glad you, because I was going to be my next point is obviously
I anticipated.
Yes, this creates jobs.
Yeah.
But how many jobs are we talking? How are we going to impart skills?
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, you would still need help. I mean, who are we also? I know you've partnered with DB.
Yes.
But there are obviously lots of other pioneers in this industry.
Yes.
Is it just going to be DB? Are we bringing in the Asian nations as well to come on board and help us? How does this work? How many jobs are we talking?
Yeah. So, employment-wise, the railway sector globally is known to be a big employer, directly in the process of build, but also in operations and maintenance, equipment supply. It's a huge employer. It's really a massive employer. So depending on what corridors in what countries we're developing, we are already in discussions with a number of governments on the continent formally. We're looking to develop some corridors. There's projects already we have in Southern Africa, in East Africa, in West Africa.
East Africa, Southern Africa, they like Botswana, for instance. Let's talk Ethiopia, let's talk Kenya. They also currently have their own railway projects under. Are you allowed to say how the continent will be connected? How are we going to do this? Which countries are involved? I'm assuming you can't connect the entire continent.
Yeah. Well, what we have is a vision that will not be realized in my lifetime.
Yes.
But when we cast our mind forward, and again, because of the capacity that we bring, the intention is we will start off with strategic corridors that support evacuation of freight. But the intention is then to develop that into networks that support intra-Africa trade.
All right. Ronald, one thing I want to talk about, for instance, in experience, railway is a fairly new thing on the continent. We have railway. But in terms of, let's talk riders. And people who have access to it as passengers. It's not as developed as it is in Europe.
Yes,
and that's
correct.
I'm saying it's a new thing.
Correct.
Fairly new thing.
Correct.
That we are late to the game.
Yeah.
How would this now influence riders, influence our access to continents, access across the continent to other countries as a rider? Not just, let's leave the trade and import and all of that. Let's streets riders. How does this affect them? And I want to take a quick break and then we'll talk about that.
Perfect.
All right, we are joined in studio by Ronald Ntuli, who is Ronald Ntuli is from Thelo DB, and Thelo DB has received a blank check to develop railway in Africa. You smile and blush. We're going to talk about this after the break.
Thank you. Yeah.
Welcome back to News World. You're on Newsroom Africa, Channel 405. We're talking to Ronald Ntuli from Thelo DB. Thelo DB has received a deal. They've signed an MoU at the Africa Investment Forum, and this MoU involves developing Africa's railway. We touched a little bit on freight railway, and before the break, I wanted to find out more about passenger railway, because that's something that's still fairly, it's not fully explored. I think Africa as a continent, we have come very late to the game compared to other parts of the world. It's still it's a new phenomena. If you look at the situation, if we bring it back closer to home, Gautrain. We had many hopes and aspirations for Gautrain, but ridership has dwindled. How do we avoid something like that now?
Yeah. So, I can't speak for Gautrain, obviously, but You are right in that the development of railways, if you look at the history of railways in Africa, it's been primarily freight rail, right? And the reason for that is it's Africa's colonial history. I have no reason to talk about colonialism, but it's Africa's colonial history in that Africa was really a source of extraction of mineral and agricultural produce. So in most part, if you look at railway patterns on the continent, other than in South Africa, generally speaking, most railway corridors are really from a mine to a port. So what you read out of that is really just evacuation of bulk commodities. That's the first part.
Imports, exports, that sort of thing. Yes.
Yeah, and mostly exports.
I'm hoping this project will also focus on passenger railway as well, because I think it's important.
This is where I was coming to. Yeah. So our mandate as Thelo DB is to develop both freight and passenger railways.
All right. Thank you for clarifying that for me. Yeah. What sort of constraints with a project like this that you're encountering? I know you said you're in discussions with governments.
Yes.
You can't tell us exactly the governments, and maybe can't expand more on how we're going to connect the continent. But what sort of other constraints are you facing with this project now? I mean, I know it's still early days.
Yeah. So the one thing I should say from the outset is the engagements we've had with governments on the continent, there's a new excitement which comes from an understanding that we need to develop connectivity on the continent.
Oh, yes.
There's a big excitement around the railway sector. I think there's a realization by African governments that we can't keep moving bulk freight and mass transit for people on roads. It just doesn't make sense from a number of reasons. One, congestion on roads, the cost pollution. Of fixing maintenance of roads, pollution, etc., etc., etc. So from a mass mobility, people and freight point of view, African governments are beginning to accept that railways is the proposition going forward. Yeah. And when we engage with governments, we're finding that point of excitement. They're also excited about the capacity to credibly develop rail that we bring because of the global experience that our partners have had. It's an A-grade global brand. What challenges do we see? The one big important point that we had to resolve in our offering is the ability to finance the projects that we pursue. So the agreement with the African Export-Import Bank really ticks that box in a very big way because of who Afreximbank is, which is also owned by all the African governments. We're having discussions with other financiers because you'll understand that railways is not only skills intensive, it's capital intensive. So we're having discussions with other financiers also so that we have a broader pool of capital.
Even though you have a blank check here. I mean, would you need more financing with a blank check?
So Vic, the reality of it is there is not, if you read the numbers that the African Development Bank has put out in terms of the infrastructure demand on the continent, it ranges from an annual need of from 120 billion US dollars to about $170 billion per annum. That's the infrastructure gap.
But if you see the amount of money that China has already invested into the continent.
That's correct. Yeah. So the point I'm making is that no single financier will fund the requirement that we have as Thelo DB to support development of railways in Africa.
Right.
So what we have to do is the relationship with the Africa Export-Import Bank is an incredible start for us. But inevitably, we're going to have to mobilize other capital. And we're getting valuable interest from domestic finance.
What does the project mean for like the China Road and Belt Initiative?
Yeah.
How does that play into this?
Yeah. Look, for us, so we as Thelo DB are engaged with a number of international suppliers, stakeholders of railways. We are not inclined to one or another. Definitively, we're very clear about that. So we're having formal engagements with companies out of China that want to support this initiative, out of Russia, out of the United States, and other regions like Europe as well. So we're having broad discussions. And I think we are well positioned to mobilize global capacity to support the development of the railway sector on the continent.
I just want to backtrack a little bit earlier, Ronald. You mentioned about the capacity and the ability of railway to create jobs.
Yes.
But, I mean, railway it's a great means and a great way to accelerate development.
It's an enabler.
It's an enabler.
Railways is a means to an end. It's not an end in itself.
But surely it's not enough to just catalyze growth and jobs. You would need more. Let's look at air, and let's look at road, and let's look at railway. If we have now developed this railway infrastructure in Africa, will it be affordable for people to access? Will it be much more affordable than roads and air travel to transport goods and also to transport people? That's my main concern. I always use railway. I mean, it is expensive. I mean,
no, that's
you mentioned money,
right.
and it's very expensive it's an ambitious, expensive project. And you mentioned the amount of capital, even though you have a blank check.
That's correct.
How does this influence the other end?
That's correct. So Thelo DB brings the full capability of rails, of railway. We can carry any project. So because we carry from feasibility study, which is a very important starting point, and I'll tell you why in the context of your question.
Yes.
From feasibility study, we'll do design and engineering.
Okay.
We will do construction oversight. We'll basically do the project management to make sure that it's delivered to quality and to standard and to cost. We'll do the testing and commissioning to make sure that below rail infrastructure, signaling, rolling stock is all to spec and operates as specified. And then we'll do operations and maintenance, and we'll do training and skills development. So that's the full spectrum of a railway project.
Yes.
The reason I emphasize it as a full spectrum is we're not paper consultants. We're not saying, here's a document, go out and see what you do with it, Mr. Government. Or we're not simply...
We're taking full responsibility.
We're taking full responsibility for it. It's amongst the first time that full integrated capacity is brought to the continent of Africa. We're also not contractors who say, we'll build you the track, thank you, good luck, go and do whatever. We take full responsibility for a project. We will operate it for 20, 25 years, 30 years as the government wishes. The importance of highlighting it like that is that we are a commercial institution. When we draw down on the funding that we raise for a project, we would have done the feasibility study to understand viability of the project. So it is expensive. It has to be viable first and foremost, because it has to be sustainable for the long term.
I mean, I'm quite excited. I mean, having traveled and seeing what's out there in terms of railway, and it's long overdue that something like this reaches the continent and then we do this. So very excited about what Thelo DB is doing. I know you mentioned you're now in the discussion stages with government. When do we expect rollout? When can we see some sort of tangible proof of this railway? I mean, what's the timeline?
So Thelo, independently as a company, prior to the relationship with Deutsche Bahn, which in fact led to the relationship with Deutsche Bahn, we already have put capital on our own balance sheet in a company called Thelo Rolling Stock and deployed, and our trains are already moving freight in a number of geographies on the continent already. It's not a tomorrow issue, and this we've been already...
well, this is why you got the blank check.
No, look, we had to. The reality is, as a black South African company, involved in a skills-intensive sector of this nature, we had to prove ourselves.
And it also must be said that you are investors. I mean,
That's correct.
You had to have done something.
That's correct.
For the investors to be incredibly confident in you
That's
to
correct.
give you this check. You
That's
borrowed investors at this forum.
Believe me, it doesn't start from,
Smooth talking.
No.
Yeah, there has to be some tangible something.
There has to be some substance. We actually have trains already that are running on a number of networks and corridors on the continent of Africa.
Well, there you have a chairman on the board of Thelo DB discussing this very ambitious, very exciting railway project. They have been given a blank check by the African countries to trade with one another. Sources, to import and export from each other, playing to the trade, the free trade agreement, and this is definitely going to contribute to that. So I'm definitely looking forward to. It's very exciting. It's exciting times for Africa, and we're looking to know some of the.
I'll be back here to talk about the next big project once it's committed and signed. But we have some very interesting, we have a very interesting pipeline of projects that already, even though it's corridors initially, already quite transformative in terms of development for the continent.
In terms of development for the continent. And like Ronald's saying, this project is not only, the mandate and the MoU that they've signed is not only for freight railway, but also passenger railway, which I think is very important and particularly exciting and something that has been needed on the continent for a very long time. Hopefully it'll be cheaper to travel across the continent on a train. It'll be a lot more exciting as well.
Yes, no, good.
Yeah. All right. So Newsworld's going to take a short break. That was Ronald Ntuli, who sits on the board of Thelo DB. Thelo DB has been, and I must emphasize again, a blank check, but they're still looking for more financing as they develop this Africa railway network. What an amazing time to be alive and to be an African on this continent. All right. When we continue, we're going to talk about another ambitious goal. The UNAIDS has set a goal and they call it the 1990 goal, and we'll tell you more about this after the break.